TNT Open Mind Insights brings you powerful, authentic conversations, illuminating the path to better mental health care for all.
Hi, good morning,
Good morning.
Marshall. My name
Hi.
is Sarah. I've heard a lot of good things about you, but I actually have not had the honor of meeting you before.
I'm so glad to meet you. Yeah. And if you're hearing anything nice from Robert, it's because I pay
You
him.
paid him?
Yeah.
Yeah, a good
Yeah.
$20 in the pocket.
Yeah. Sometimes more. He charges a lot to get a decent review.
He's gotten more expensive.
I'm so glad to be here. Nice to meet you.
Yeah, and so I work with him in the Train New Trainers program, and
Okay.
there's a lot of things that kind of bring me to the passion I have. I'm a child and adolescent psychiatrist. I'm a pediatrician. I'm an
Okay.
East Coast girly,
Uh-huh.
and I know you're involved in the field, and I would just love to hear a little bit more about what you do.
Sure, yeah. I've been in the field largely in the hospitals of Southern California for some time, and I'll tell you a little bit about that.
Yeah.
But I do remember when Robert first got me down here for one of your TNT events. It was at this hotel, in fact. And he'd been telling me about TNT for some time, and of course it sounded interesting with all that you do in training all of the providers and that exponential expansion. And then I came down to see it for myself and just completely blown away
Yeah.
with how big it was, how well attended it was,
Mhm.
and the variety of providers in the room. It was extraordinary. And I know that we're here just to talk about mental health in general. And so I don't mean it as a shameless plug for TNT, but very genuinely was completely blown away by its impact and its
Yeah.
size. And it looks bigger this year. And so,
I'm very
yeah,
glad you're
yeah,
impressed with kind of the program. I think it's something that, I really love, and really the diversity of the audience that we have.
yeah,
And really for me as a child psychiatrist and pediatrician, it comes down to the impact we have on like kids and families.
yeah, yeah.
And again, I'm curious at kind of what your passion is in the mental health space.
Yeah, so like a lot of us in the field, I come to it from personal experience and personal impact from mental health and substance use. And so that got me into the field and really enjoyed direct clinical work for some time.
Yeah.
And then the more I leaned into programs and services, the more I was appreciating the expanding impact you can have through training other providers, harnessing other providers, and putting systems and processes in place. And so for a little over the last, well, gosh, I guess it's almost 25 years now. I started in the hospitals in 2000 and have really been focused on programs and services there,
Okay.
which I think is why TNT resonates so well.
Yeah.
Because when you think about traditional healthcare systems,
Mhm.
even the systems that have mental health services in
Sure.
place,
Sure.
whether that's a psychiatry unit or services consult liaison maybe embedded in the emergency department or the medical floors, or maybe you might be lucky enough to have something in your primary care.
Yeah.
For the most part, you're something of a stepchild of that health system
Yeah.
and not super well understood. As a stepchild myself and to all the other stepchildren out there, I don't mean anything negative about that other than to say sometimes you don't feel like you quite fit in or aren't fully understood.
Sure.
And so, some of the emergency room physicians, nursing staff, social work teams are some of my friends and family. And
My brother's an ER doc as well,
yeah,
so I can relate.
yeah, and I love them to death.
Mhm.
But boy, taking that as a snapshot, you see a whole lot of variation in understanding and appreciation of mental health services.
Mhm.
Um, sometimes you'll have somebody who has some kind of personal connection to it,
Yeah.
and it might have expanded their heart.
Yeah.
Sometimes you might have a provider who's got a personal connection to it, not a lot of education around it, and it's actually callous to them a bit,
Yeah.
and everything in between. Tying
Absolutely.
that back to TNT, I think that's why it resonated for me so much, and seeing
Yeah.
how big your program is
Yeah.
and the impact, because we have so far to go still continuing to insert mental health and substance use services,
Absolutely.
knowledge, appreciation, kind of acceptance, understanding, and standards of care in these
Absolutely.
traditional systems. And so I think TNT is really working hard to do that.
Yeah.
So that's been my background is largely the hospitals
Okay. Nice.
and trying to expand services.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
I'll speak to the stigma standpoint. I know when, I was in medical school choosing a specialty, and I eventually chose a combination program where I did child psychiatry in addition to pediatrics. the response was, why?
Yeah, yeah.
What?
Why
What
would you
is
do
this?
that?
Why are you doing this? And
Yeah.
again, my brother's an emergency room doc. My mom was a pediatrician at a primary care site in a federally qualified health center in the Bronx, New
Okay.
York.
Yeah.
So
Which
again,
makes her a default psychiatrist anyway.
and I think that's why the
Same
apple,
with the
as much
ER
as I
doc.
tried to run away from not doing what my mom did,
Yeah,
the
yeah.
apple did not fall far from the tree.
Yeah, yeah.
And again, I think the understanding of we need to think like there's an arbitrary separation of these systems. Why? Why do we think about pediatric mental health separately from pediatric physical health when they are so intricately aligned? And I think a program like this really brings them together because addressing that stigma is a huge part of the process. And I love when you said you kind of loved the one-on-one clinical care you were doing, and yet the impact was greater when you could kind of help other people come to that. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Oh yeah, I mean, just on the appreciation of one-on-one clinical care or one-on family or something,
Sure.
or even running a group. It's just a tremendous honor to be invited into people's lives the way we
Absolutely.
are,
Yeah.
uniquely kind of in this field. And so it's a great honor, and it's enjoyable, it's challenging, and all of the good things. And so
Yeah.
I get a lot out of it personally. But yes, if you're in a traditional clinical setting, for example, um, and I'm seeing clients, on 50-minute increments. Well, how many of those do you squeeze out of a day?
Yep.
And that's fantastic for the people that are doing that. And
Absolutely.
God bless every one of them. And we need more. But yeah, I think there was a light bulb went off when I first was able to lift into some management and leadership roles in the hospitals, where all of a sudden you're overseeing a team of 10, 15, or 20 clinicians who are all seeing that many
Absolutely.
individuals, and appreciating, boy, the impact here could really be extraordinary,
Yeah.
to the degree we can bolster their education understanding, standards of care, clinical caliber, and all of that.
Absolutely.
We could have a real impact here.
Yeah.
So that started to really catch fire with me, and that's what I've been kind of focused on ever since, is how can I expand the circle of influence and impact,
Awesome.
and really enjoying it.
It's
Yeah,
exciting. I like the catching fire because I do
yeah,
think once you realize your impact can be greater than just what's directly in front of you,
yeah.
it almost just it's exciting.
It is.
Can you talk about the need? Why do we need to expand that impact?
Oh, the need is so big, and it's funny when you say mental health too, because when you say mental health to a group of 10 people, there's going to be 10 different images that come up in their minds. So I just said mental health, and somebody in the group thought of early childhood mental health. Somebody else thought of something akin to that, which is maternal mental health, and early attachment. But somebody else in the room thought of psychosis, and that kind of age of late adolescence, early adulthood, when those things emerge and how much needs are there. Somebody else thought of veteran mental health. Someone else thought of substance use, and why don't we include that more forthrightly in mental? It's just
Absolutely.
different kind of for everybody. And so when we say health care, that's everything from Band-Aids to brain surgery, right? I mean, it's just huge. And so I think when we say mental health, for all of us to continue to deepen appreciation, that we're talking about a very expansive term
Absolutely.
that includes a whole lot. And we've made certain strides in mental health, but boy, we have still so far to go. And I think when we say mental health too, we're talking a lot about mental illness in the mind's eye of most.
Yeah.
In your training and probably mine, if we were to match notes, I'm of a different discipline, but probably most of it is on mental illness. And there's so much still to do in mental health, and getting upstream, educating people. And so again, tying this back to TNT and to you, so the discipline of pediatrics and child and adolescent psychiatry, while some people were scratching their head when you were charging that new path for the field, it makes all the sense in the world. I mean, it's
Yeah.
almost like, boy, most pediatricians are by default psychiatrists
Yeah.
and
They end up
need more
doing like
training.
therapeutic work and talking about sleep and how to feed their kids and
For
how to
sure.
get their kids outside and play. That's actually, there's lots of therapeutic elements that go into having those discussions.
100%. Yeah, so I guess your question was on, yeah, like why the need, and so I suppose I'm just trying to articulate that the need is so expansive, and for many of us, we have a fairly narrow understanding of mental health when the word first pops up.
Mhm.
But if we can widen the lens, it's just an enormous field, and the need is continually unfolding. And
Yeah.
I don't know of any other area of healthcare that weaves itself into kind of the human experience.
Mhm.
And so, you know, when I've got a broken leg, there's the thing. You can see it.
I have a bone I need to fix
Yeah,
now.
but I'm not my leg.
Yes.
Or, you know, even something like diabetes,
Mhm.
we know what that is, and there's kind of some concrete thing we can look, see, and interact
Sure.
with. And while we're making these great strides
Mhm.
with brain science and understanding of medications and clinical interventions and
Yeah.
all these exciting things, um, there's still this kind of inexplicable aspect
Mhm.
of mental health
Yeah.
and mental illness that weaves itself in with how we experience ourselves as
Yeah.
people, almost kind of into a spiritual realm for some. And that's just a whole universe that still stands to be tapped and
To be explored.
understood more.
Because all of our
Yeah,
experiences, and to some degree, all the experiences of my parents and my ancestors kind of lend themselves into who I am and what I am
that's right.
and how I interface with
For
the
sure.
world. And again,
For
some of that
sure.
is good. And we
Yep.
don't often, like you were saying, we don't talk about the health, the positive of that as
Right.
much.
Right.
We focus on the negative. And again, some of it is negative.
Right.
And you're right. All those people who are like, what are you doing?
Yeah.
A year, 2 years after I got into the training, we're like, actually,
Yeah.
can we ask you?
Yeah.
And then again, all these like, under blanket people with concerns that lay under blankets for a while
Yeah.
suddenly came and said, "Well, what do you think about this?"
Yeah.
To the point where I think my mom a couple of years ago was like, "Thank God we have a psychiatrist in the family." And I was like, "I am not the family psychiatrist." But it just started in my own, just my little family unit. It
Yeah.
began expanding, I think, people's understanding of what mental health could be.
Mm-hmm.
And again, all these concerns. And I think, like you said, that's a unique aspect of mental health where there is so much there, and so much of it, whether it's stigma, whether it's not lack of understanding, just lays underground for a while. And we're kind of asking people to, again, there's an honorable, can you open up?
Right.
And I
Right.
think in so doing, you discover this vast need.
Yes.
And it becomes almost suppressing when you
Mm-hmm.
realize that the need is so great. And I think that drives then the big impact. You're like, again, one on one, I think I do really good work. But there's hundreds, thousands, millions of people who need more. How are we possibly helping them?
And as you're saying that, I guess what's coming to me too is that yeah, mental health, mental illness, health challenges manifest in all these different levels and layers like you're describing. And it is also on a continuum in a unique way.
Mm-hmm.
And so, you know, somebody that comes to a therapeutic office or something, a therapist's office or your psychiatry office, sometimes there's a really distinctive diagnosis.
Mm-hmm.
This is what this is. I've seen it 1,000 times. It comes right out of the book.
Yeah,
Here's the protocol. Boom, boom, boom. But then so many times it's not that crisp and
absolutely.
clean,
Yeah.
and there isn't full criteria met, and yet the person struggling is no less struggling,
Yeah.
um, and there's these complicated family dynamics interwoven and these sorts of
Mm-hmm.
things, and so I think that's something that's just so compelling about this field,
Absolutely.
and leaves itself open for just enormous continued growth for us as a field,
Yeah.
is continuing to deepen our understanding and sensitivity to these things.
Yeah.
But it manifests across a continuum. It manifests differently through your cultural background.
Mm-hmm.
It manifests sometimes different for men than women. All of these things just make it so unique and interesting.
Yeah.
So that's kind of, I think, the fire for me behind it is it's just fascinating. And there's nothing, I don't think, that I've experienced more rewarding than walking with somebody along that path
Absolutely.
and watching change happen.
Yeah.
And that's one of our great strengths in being
Does
people.
something spring to mind when you're like, oh yes, here was someone I kind of got through?
Yeah. Um, Wow, that's an interesting, yeah, yes, it does, and I'm just pausing because it's funny, the story that came immediately to mind is probably 20 years ago or
Sure.
something. Um, how interesting, and there's probably hundreds and maybe thousands of these stories, but the one that came springing first to mind, I worked with the county for a while, early on. I was still an intern, I think, and we did in-home services, so intensive in-home services
Okay.
for children that were at risk of losing their placement
Mhm.
in the housing setup that
Okay.
they were currently in.
Oh, these poor
And
kids.
yeah, yeah, and so so there was a young man that I worked with. He was a young teenager, I think at the time, maybe he was 14 or 15 or something,
Mhm.
and he was on the autistic spectrum
Sure.
and was also struggling with depression and what somebody was looking at as a potential emerging bipolar disorder. It was kind of a cluster of challenges, and um, and he was having a hard time going to school,
Yeah.
and was refusing to go to school, and um, and was at risk of losing his placement because of some behavior issues. And I worked with him 15 to 20 hours a week.
Wow.
Yeah, it
Okay.
was this
That's
intensive
very
home thing.
intensive.
It was a really interesting model, and for several months. And I remember we had kind of met some of our goals,
Yeah.
and we were winding things down. And gosh, I almost feel teary as I anticipate what I'm going to tell you. And this young guy, I'm at his house. That's
Mhm.
where we did treatment, and kind of wrapping up and having our final time together. And I was leaving his front door to my car, and he called my name. It was almost out of a movie or something, And I turned back, and he said, "You did a good job."
That's so sweet. You're gonna make me teary-eyed
Yeah,
thinking
yeah.
about.
I'm so surprised that
Yeah.
that story came up because
Yeah.
out of all of the stories, that one, it's because that's a long time ago that happened.
Yeah.
But it was so meaningful to me, and I just got in the car and I was tearful the whole drive home.
Yeah.
But it was so rewarding,
Absolutely.
and because we met some of our goals, and he was able to appreciate the
Yeah.
growth that he had made,
Yeah.
and to be a part of that was really beautiful. So why that story popped up, I have no idea, but
I
there's
think
many
there's
like it, and that's what's so rich
I
about this
think there's some
field.
of these cases, and it feels like the other systems, people in their lives, the other adults have kind of given up on the
Yeah,
kid. So the
yeah,
story that comes to mind for me is, and
yeah,
I do some consult liaison psychiatry work, and
uh,
I had a little guy who
yeah,
was admitted for behavioral dysregulation, and just literally everyone kind of gave him the reinforcement that he was a bad kid.
mhm,
And again, he would have these disruptions and try to hurt himself, others, property,
yeah,
and so I could see where that came from. But
yeah,
there was a night where we'd come up with a safety plan. He tried. He tried a couple of things on his safety plan. It ended up not working. And then again, I think he threw some stuff against a wall.
mm,
And so when he came in and I saw him the next day, I was kind of like, "Hey, you want to talk about what happened last night?" He didn't even look at me. He looked down.
mm,
He almost became teary. And then I said, "I'm really proud of you."
mm,
And he was shocked.
yeah,
No, and it was like no one had even like thanked him for trying. And I was like, "You tried some of the things on your safety plan.
yeah,
It was really tough to do that.
yeah,
I'm proud of you for trying." This kid was stunned
yeah,
to the point where I almost started crying because I was like, I don't think anyone says nice things to him anymore
yeah,
because all they see is the behavioral disruption and they don't see the kid who's struggling. They don't see that kid with such an acute need
mm.
that he doesn't know how to regulate himself.
That's really powerful. What you're highlighting, I think, is so true for all of the challenges that we deal with in this field, where the manifestation of the illness can be so challenging,
Yeah.
visible, and attention
Yeah.
grabbing that it's sometimes easy to overlook the person underneath it
Hmm.
who's actually suffering through that.
Yeah.
And yeah, what a poignant thing. And so he felt recognized as
He
a
felt,
person.
and he was able to sit, he immediately was like, "But then I threw the thing."
Yeah,
And I said, "I
yeah,
know.
yeah,
And I want to focus on you tried."
yeah,
What that tells me is, hey, let's work together and try again today.
yeah,
And
yeah,
he was better able to engage with me on safety planning that day.
yeah.
And again, I didn't need to be a fancy
That's
psychiatrist to
right,
do what I did.
right.
You just needed someone to learn how to see this
See
child
the person.
and see the good in him.
Yeah.
Even though, again, there's a lot of illness, there were a lot of unmet needs
Yeah.
that resulted in this big behavioral disruption.
Yeah.
You just need to help someone see the good in that kid
That's it.
to help change
Yeah.
the impact in his life.
Yeah, I love it. You're reminding me of another story that's kind of shocking me that it's coming to mind.
I would
The
love to
file
hear it.
folders are
Thank
opening,
you.
I guess. But in the hospital setting, I was doing some supervision for a while. And so I had an intern alongside me, and she was doing an initial assessment. This is on an inpatient psychiatric unit.
Sure.
And the person that we were assessing had schizophrenia.
Okay.
And long term had been on the streets and pretty rough around the edges, had been through
Yeah.
it quite a lot.
Sure.
And so I'm in the room as the intern is really leading the initial assessment. And at some point in the assessment, he's sharing stories and answering the questions, and sometimes kind of going off topic and challenged psychiatrically at the time. And something struck the intern,
Okay.
and she said something to the degree of, wow, what's that like? You know, she left the script of the clinical questions
Absolutely.
and was struck by the person in front of her
Yeah.
to ask, wow, what is that like? He was describing, being on the street and psychotic and all these things. And it caught my attention that she
Yeah.
asked that.
Yeah.
And he paused for a minute in the middle of kind of an otherwise haphazard answering of questions. And he said, it's really hard.
Yeah.
And it was striking because, kind of like your story, oh, there's the person underneath all of the stuff.
Underneath the checklist of questions
Of
I know I
checklist
have
of
to
and the
ask.
symptoms and all
Yep.
the stuff. And there's the person that's actually suffering through
Yeah.
all of those behaviors and the things that everyone else is seeing on the street. And it humanized it
I was gonna say,
so.
it's like finding the
and-
humanity in the
Yes.
person in front of you.
Yeah, and that's such, I think, a rich part of what our field offers.
Yeah.
And is such an honor to be a part of. So, yeah.
Now I feel even more honored to be in this
Yeah.
field. This is awesome. Yeah, and again, I do think it is those individual moments that we can experience that drive. But again, it doesn't take the specific years of training we've had to try to find that humanity,
Amen.
right?
Yep.
And so I think then it renders the question, could we train other people? Could we have a bigger impact? Again, you don't need to know the complex psychopharm. You don't need to know, complex theories of how to do therapy. How do you find the person and have that connection?
And I think we have to do what you're describing. I mean, given the need that we were just talking about, how expansive it is, and we're really still in the early stages of recognizing
Yeah.
the true size and scope of mental health, mental challenges, and mental illness, all
Yeah.
on the spectrum. That isn't going to be addressed by an army of psychiatry or an army of therapists. There's a role for us to play, to be sure. But I think to address this challenge, and in certain communities you're watching this happen,
Absolutely.
we have to harness community
Yeah.
and expand the definition of what constitutes a provider, and really start to move things upstream.
Okay. Can you tell me more what you mean by that? How do you expand that definition of provider?
I think, in California, for example, probably other states, but I'm aware of California's effort to legitimize and even kind of formalize peer models. That's a perfect example. Some of the most impactful clinicians I've ever worked alongside are certified drug and alcohol counselors.
Yeah.
Who came up through the ranks of their own research and development in addiction themselves.
Yep.
And then through their own recovery were inspired to go get that certification and do a tremendous job in wrapping their arm
Yeah.
around Joe, who they just dragged off the street, and getting his attention.
Absolutely.
And the whole thing, or psych techs, or but all of these things where, looking beyond the MD psychiatrist,
Yes.
the master's level or PhD clinician, to recognize the impact that we can have in bringing in these other groups.
Yeah. There's certain ivory tower silos of how we've been taught that
Yeah.
this is how medicine works. period, full
Yes.
stop.
Yes.
But that's not how people work,
Exactly.
right?
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. And I do think that this might be bouncing around a little bit, but here's a little thought that comes up on the topic. So of kind of the ivory tower and the this and the that. So mental health, we were saying at the start of the conversation, has been kind of the oddball off to the side of
Yes.
traditional healthcare.
Yeah.
But then within that, then we've had historically the psychiatry and the formalized therapy models and those kinds of things. And anything sub to that has just been way off to the side. And I've been kind of thinking about this idea for a few years now that mental health has always, in that way, been kind of the ugly duckling. Um, and where it's at now, the season I think we're in,
Yeah.
as it matures a bit, is discovering, oh, it's not an ugly duckling. It actually has the potential to be the swan in the pond in this unique way. Because you're talking about like the human being underneath these challenges.
Yeah.
This field has the ability to connect with that human being
Yeah.
in really unique ways. So where traditional healthcare once had mental health off to the side here,
Yes.
and we were lucky if people trickled through this filter to get to this one, really the script could get flipped as we advance. And mental health, in many ways, could be a first point of connection where if I feel more comfortable with mental health challenge, I'm talking about my anxiety, that gets me into a provider who's tied in with traditional healthcare to say, boy, and you know what? Why don't we start looking at some of this diabetes stuff, which then gets maybe potentially better managed. Like there's a different pathway than the traditional pathway, which then gets enhanced all the more if we can start to harness these different license types or peer
Again,
models.
expanding who a provider is, who can promote healthcare.
Yeah, and I know I'm a little messy as I talk about this. I'm sorry because it's on video. But tying into your world.
Yeah.
So there's a community school model in high schools now, where a peer is embedded into the school. It could be a clinician, but oftentimes it's a peer. So imagine at a high school in Anaheim, they have a lot of community schools. There's a mental health peer there, Spanish speaking, Hispanic culturally, and the mom of 2 high school kids, single mom, Spanish first language, struggling with anxiety and depression and a whole host of medical challenges, but doesn't go and see anybody medically. One, because she's mom and too busy dealing with the boys, and they're often sacrificing themselves, moms across the world.
Kids come first always.
Right, and so she's not doing that, and it makes her uncomfortable to go to a traditional medical setting. Well, she connects with this peer at the high school, and just in casual conversation, little bit by little bit, starts opening up about her anxiety and depression. And that becomes an inroad, and that becomes a point of connection and safety and comfort, and ultimately lends itself through relationship there and starting to address the anxiety and depression, and openness to starting to go see and attend to her medical challenges.
Absolutely.
So it's like this paradigm completely flipping from having to go see the medical doctor to potentially get a referral to psychiatry, to potentially
as
get
a
a
rule-out
referral
diagnosis of everything
to,
else,
to a therapist, to potentially this, and this, and all of the barriers of that. It's not that it's bad, but we're not going to meet all of the need
There
if
are
we
barriers,
remain...
there are stigma, and again, it's almost it's a vastly different way of looking. And you don't get that connection piece until the end. But why not start with that connection piece?
And at least expand our openings and the paths of travel through a potential mental health system. And so I'm going on this little rant and ramble based on us talking about expanding a pool of providers. That is an important part of our future maturation in mental health, is expanding the definition of what constitutes a provider, elevating somebody like that peer, because that becomes a swan in the pond, actually maybe the first point of contact, rather than this weird ugly duckling off to the side that doesn't have a real role in healthcare. And that part excites me.
I love that thinking. And again, it's so interesting because we're also in a current, world where everyone has phones and screens and, thousands of people they follow on social media, but no one has connection anymore.
Yep.
And I see this in the kids where they have followers, but they don't have friends.
Yep.
And so I think really highlighting that initial connection piece is so valuable. From your expertise, what do you think kind of, those problems are that are still driving? And then how do we expand this workforce to meet that need?
Boy, I was going to kind of ask you the same, like when you mentioned social media as a pediatric psychiatrist, what you see as the challenges with it
Yeah.
or the promise of it. I tend to be a little bit more negative about social media, and I'm sure there's lots of potential good that does come of it and that can come of it. So I'm a little bit old fuddy-duddy, and I'm just not on any of the platforms. I tend to see more of the isolation coming from it
Yeah,
than the genuine connection,
sure.
and it just makes me think again of like your question was something along the lines of how do we train up for it, or
Yeah, I guess
how do we get the
what do you see
providers?
as the vision
I,
for the future?
I,
How do we save the children?
I guess we do have to move further upstream, and so can we use those platforms for communication,
Yeah,
continue to destigmatize? That has been happening some. I think there's been a recent wave of people of visibility, whether
yeah,
it's a music star or an Olympic athlete
yeah,
or whomever, being more willing to come out and open with their challenges, which has
yeah,
been huge. Um, but I think we're going to have to continue on this line that we're talking about
yeah,
of expanding pools of providers and elevating community
yeah.
as a source of
Elevating people who haven't
health,
had the
wellness.
power, the recognition before, and recognizing what they inherently have in this
Yes.
service.
Yeah, and that they can be stewards of each other's
Yeah,
mental health and well-being, and in fact, we all are.
yeah,
And that is what's unique about this area of healthcare. We kind of are our brother's keeper,
yeah.
and maybe we can leverage some of those
Hmm.
platforms
Yeah,
for some of that good.
for the
But
greater good.
frankly, as I sit here today, I'm mostly a little pessimistic about them, only because I see
Yeah,
the
the
downstream
downside to social
negative
media.
impact of
Absolutely.
some of the isolation.
Yeah. And this is
So
where to me part of it is a change in just the culture of medicine.
yeah,
Right? Where, we've taken away providers' time, we've added more things for them to do, more check boxes in the, electronic medical record,
yeah,
and we've taken that all away from the connection they have with the patients and families in front of them. And I think reinvigorating that connection piece, whether it's a primary care provider, whether it's kind of advocating for these peer specialists to be that initial point of contact and get someone involved.
yeah,
We gotta think about this differently, because the way the system is heading, like, we just continue to lose time and connection,
yeah.
and that is poor for everyone's health and also for our satisfaction as people trying to implement health and healthcare.
For sure. That is it. I think that it's kind of tying us all back, the health piece,
Hmm.
that there is mental illness. It's out there. The numbers are increasing.
Yeah,
We have a lot of work to do. There is so much to do in mental health
absolutely.
and understanding health, well-being, resilience, and all
Yeah,
of that. And when I think of youth today, that's what deserves a fair amount of our time and investment is that front end
yeah.
health, well-being, resilience. That comes through social connection.
Hmm.
And so I think that's a really important piece for us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, how do we support the children?
Yeah, that's where it's at.
Hmm.
I mean, that's where it's at. My God, I blinked and all of a sudden I'm 50.
Yeah.
That's crazy. And so my son, who's 12, we're going to blink and he's going to be in his 20s and then 30s.
Yeah.
And what we know about kids, and you've got the statistics probably off the top of your head better than I do, but when it takes an average of 7 years to identify a problem and intervene effectively, boy, that's a miss. Time moves fast. And so it is all about how do we help the children. I mean, I know you're putting it forward as a cute quip, but actually it's right on the money.
And they don't
That's
have the safe spaces where they used to.
that,
Some of them live in neighborhoods that aren't safe. They do, shooting drills in school. I never did that as a kid. I have an 8-month-old, and I am like, that frightens me that even that would be considered a normal for her once,
yeah,
she gets to school age.
yeah, yeah,
Um, all of the stuff that they're seeing going on around them, that does affect them and their ability to be strong, independent, resilient, and gritty, folks who have ideals and hopes and dreams.
Yeah. I would love to see in part of our education us start to focus formally, and I think
Hmm.
a lot of schools are doing this,
Yeah.
focus formally on kind of mental wellness, interpersonal
Hmm.
relationships, resiliency,
Yeah.
and that part of human development,
Absolutely.
um, be, just because it's so central to
Hmm.
being a well-adjusted, functioning, contributing adult now.
Yeah.
And so I know that when my daughter went through high school, she had wood shop and home ec like I did, however long it was before
Yeah.
that. And I'm thinking, I don't know, maybe wood shop is still is relevant, but maybe not so much. And home ec, I'm not sure she's going to be sewing a ton right now, but a class on interpersonal development and resiliency would be super relevant
Yeah. Or
to her
even
every day.
emotional insight and awareness and coping with the negative things that we face.
Yeah, yeah. So there's an idea where you might take TNT and the concepts of it and start weaving it into the schools as well.
And that's Robert's
In fact,
dream.
I think Robert's already working on
I,
that.
I think there's a dream in place. Yes. Time literally flew by. I
I
didn't
know,
realize
this
how
was
long I
so
was
fun meeting
chatting
you and
with you.
talking
Yeah,
to
I
you.
didn't know anything
Yeah,
about you. So, thank you so much for
yeah,
your time and really
yeah,
your insights, your expertise.
yeah.
If people want to know how to get in touch with you, are you able to kind of share how they're able to do that or get to know more about the work that you're doing?
Oh, sure. I'm not on any real social media. I think I have a LinkedIn post that floats around somewhere. And so if they're on there, they can contact me. But I can give you guys my email
Yeah,
or
that would be
something, and
great.
people can reach out. And I'm happy to do that.
Okay, perfect.
Would love to talk with the community.
Awesome.
Um, right now, I'm part of an organization called Care Solace,
Hmm.
and we do mental health coordination and services for K through 12 up and down the state. And so after this interview, I'll talk to you further about that because
Yeah,
we
that
have
would be
lots
wonderful.
to chat about with that in
Yes.
your field too.
No, definitely.
So
That would be
yeah,
great. Again, thank you so much for
thank
your
you.
time. It's been just lovely talking to you.
You too, Sarah. Thank
Yeah.
you.